Hello and welcome to the 201st episode of the Shawn and Teos led Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with Teos Abadia. Teos, what's the haps?
I'm good. I didn't go to Gen Con, but I'm otherwise feeling pretty good.
And everyone who did is not feeling pretty good. Not because Gen Con wasn't great, but because it's a con with 70,000 people, and you know how that goes.
You got some crud, did you?
Oh, all the crud. I was listing the diseases that I caught to my friends, including like Star Trek ones and ones that like are only caught by people in like Papua New Guinea.
Yeah,
And
yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
so it's a good list I've got going.
that's
But
unfortunate.
but I'm here, and I have to give a quick shout out. Uh, Mary Toms, who works at the Bald Man Games desk, told me that her husband Mark Casiglio, who listens to the show in bed, so
Okay.
she has to hear you and I talk while she's there. And I just want to say, Mark, that's grounds in divorce for most states of the union. Connecticut may not be, but most of the other places in the world, sorry, you shouldn't do that to Mary.
It's
But
funny.
Gen Con was awesome. I'm not going to go into too
Good.
much, but I got me one of these.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Where's
Yeah,
mine? Where's mine? Oh.
yeah. And I didn't get one by standing in line, so there's no special thing in it.
No book. Was it? It's a sticker. But whatever.
Yeah, a
No
book plate. Yep.
oil, whatever. I don't
I
know.
got one for running games for Baldwin Games,
There you go.
and
Wow,
and
that's
I
a great
also
thing for all the
I
DMs.
also got one of 150 D&D 50 tote bag.
That's pretty
And
sweet.
You might think one of 150, that must be worth a lot. What makes it less valuable is Dave Chris' big head on it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That
yeah.
that immediately just
So don't
yeah.
get too excited.
I pretended I was at Gen Con and I picked up Quest from the Infinite Staircase in the alt cover. And then I read through it and marveled at sort of the fine, and by fine, I mean like a cute job they had to do of paring down the adventures to kind of fit this format and also to like make them like a better, shorter experience. Actually, really makes me want to run it just to
Mhm.
see like what happens, like when you run it in that kind of condensed version. Not all of them are that way, but some of them, like, a couple levels taken out of the barrier peaks and none
Mhm.
of the desert stuff in Pharaoh, right? And so it's
Yeah.
just interesting to kind of fine tune it that way. And I'm very curious to actually like maybe run one or two of these and see how it goes.
I am super curious to do that. And I believe Justice Arman, who worked on that book,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. He was the lead.
Uh, yeah, we interviewed him as part of the Eldritch Lorecast, which we recorded at Gen Con. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to hear more from Justice and from Mackenzie DeArmas,
Ooh.
who is a rules developer now at
Mm-hmm.
Wizards of the Coast, you can watch the Eldritch Lorecast this week.
What was she before?
She was a designer, but she
Okay.
sort of got moved into that
Into the
position.
rules. Huh.
And it's actually an interesting story of sort of how she got there, and she really didn't know she was getting there until she was there. Uh, but it's I mean, they're both absolutely wonderful people and wonderful designers and a hilarious duo to talk to. So that
Cool.
that was a lot of fun.
Great. That's awesome.
But also a lot of fun is talking to our viewers. And I talked to a lot of our listeners, a lot of our viewers while we were there. And we're going to talk to a few of them right here via, in this case, Kurt Ugle via YouTube, who says, during the discussion of Warriors of Krynn and later Living Greyhawk, Shawn mentioned players and DMs feeling daunted by the lore and feeling like they weren't playing the setting right. This struck a chord with me, as setting knowledge and expectations really impacts how things are played. What is your advice for players and GMs who plan to play in fleshed out settings like Greyhawk, Middle Earth, or Star Trek? And my quick answer here is this is going to be my show don't tell speech for like the 100th time, probably. Uh, Show don't tell is actually not great advice if you are getting into advanced fiction writing classes. The best advice for fiction writing is show when it's best to show and tell when it's best to tell. Now, show don't tell is actually great advice, though, if you're talking about delivering setting information in a role playing game. It's totally okay if you're playing a Star Wars game to say, yeah, and the Cardassians are subjugating the people of Bajor, right? It just gets that information out there. But how many game groups, if they're not already steeped in Star Trek lore, are going to be like, oh, okay, I can understand this. If you can show that subjugation, then it is viscerally understood by the players if they are in any way empathetic and role play. So that's how you do those things. And that's sort of why we're going through this Living Greyhawk Gazetteer, is to say what needs to be in a setting, what doesn't need to be, depending on the player type.
That's great advice. On my end, what I do is I try to find the part of the world or the setting that's mine. And the other stuff is great. You can use it as color, bar rumors, whatever, little extra tidbits that you add. But what matters is the immediate, right? And so we're carving our world based on those immediate things that we really care about. And you get to decide which of those move forward or don't, right? The Cult of the Dragon might have 1,000,000 years of history and all that's well and good. But what are they doing today? And what is it that matters for your campaign? And if later you want to bring in some old thing about Sam Master or whoever, go for it. But you don't have to today. Today, it's what matters, right? And so you stick to that part that's relevant, that's engaging, that's gonna register in their minds and be tangible. But I love your advice. Showing it is better, right? It's always better if you're just seeing the impacts of it. That tells you what they are and what's going on.
For sure. Second question via from George PR via Mastodon. As a professional designer, are you more likely to run a game rules as written as opposed to adding homebrew? And it's really a great question. I've actually gotten asked this question a lot. And it really depends on the situation. And that reflects in the reviews we do on different games or different products. So if I'm learning a new game or using systems of an existing game, I want to run it as written as much as possible. I want to understand how the design is supposed to support the game. What experience is this supposed to pull out of game masters and players? If I'm trying to deliver an experience to a group of players who don't really care about the rules or the product as written, then I'm going to homebrew the bejibbers out of it. I am going to do whatever it takes to make that experience something that the player will latch onto and feel is the best experience they can have.
Yeah, totally. For me, it really varies whether I'm trying to learn the system, right? So if I'm running 5th edition, one of the things I like about organized play is that I'm running it as written, right? Because you run 5th edition or whatever the edition is, it's always been like, please, really, since 3rd edition on, it's been run the game as it is with all of the rules, right? All the encounter balancing should be by the book, all of that. And that's great because you get to feel how it works with players who are also essentially using the rules. There are a few variants in organized play, but generally, you're really seeing the system, how it works. That's really useful for your kind of knowledge of the game. But now, if I'm running a game at home and I know the rules of 5th edition already, I don't have to keep running it as written. That part's already in my brain. What I need to do is experiment with what happens when I'm having vehicle combat and I'm, tack these kinds of rules on. What happens when I'm doing survival treks across a big distance? How can that be, And that's where I'm getting all these ideas and figuring things out. And I might take a pre-written adventure, but then I add entire parts to it because I'm seeing what those kinds of stories are like. And so it's just, it's that idea of like, get the base down and then play, and also based on the mission of what you're trying to learn or uncover.
Yep. And this last question actually feeds well into your answer there. It's from Thomas Connolly via Patreon. And Thomas wrote us a very long message with questions and thoughts and comments and his sort of backstory.
Very cool.
And it was a really great message. We're just going to deal with the question right now. And the question is, Shawn said there are 200 questions that need to be answered to develop an organized play system. Teos said that he hopes Wizards of the Coast will rethink Adventurers League for 2025. I'd really like to hear both of your answers for these questions. What are some of the 200 questions? What are the best answers to those questions? What makes OP good or bad for different kinds of players? And what do you hope hope Wizards might do with the Adventurers League? This is a several part series, but I'm just going to hit you with some of the really quick ones so you'll see the scope of what we're talking about. Teos has already mentioned this, so I'll get to that in a second. Think of it this way, though. If you DM a home game, you have to decide several things about the game you're about to run. What kind of content are you going to run? How are you going to what options are you going to allow the players to use? Just the core books, expansions, third party, right? All of these questions come into play. So with organized play, think of those same questions, but on a much broader level. So magic items, how are you going to handle it? If a party sits down to play and there's one Vorpal sword, who gets to take the Vorpal sword? One player? All the players? Or is there some sort of system that will limit who can take what? How many magic items are you going to allow? How do you allow them to buy magic items? Do you allow them to trade magic items? Do you allow them? Now we're going to have a crafting system, maybe. So now are you going to allow them to craft magic items or regular
Here's a good
items?
example. If you have more than one character, can one of your characters give magic items to another?
Yes.
Which also means, could I play a bunch of adventures over and over and over again, take all those magic items from all those different characters and give it to my one main character?
My first level character with the Vorpal sword. And
Yeah.
what does that mean if you only allow one person to take a magic item out when you want this magic item for your character? It's the perfect thing for your character, but this other person takes it not because their character wants it, but because a different character that they play wants it. And so you can see the sort of questions that come up, and you want there to be flexibility, you want to make players happy, but there is abuses that can happen with any system that you put into place.
Yeah. And some of these systems make you unhappy, right? Like we talked about Living Greyhawk having time units, right? Where you had to log how often you'd played, and at some point your character can't play anymore, right? That's a strong negative, but it caused all these positives, right? And if you played out of your region, your time units were doubled. So it cost twice as many units to represent that travel to this other area. Well, that was a negative, but a negative that caused some positives and made playing somewhere else rare and special and a thing to think about, but not abuse or abuse less. So all those kinds of things are gives and takes that can actually be a kind of negative that's positive, right? With Ashes of Athos, Dark Sun in 4th edition, we said you can't use Dragon Magazine. And I mean, Dragon Magazine was huge. That whole DDI content was a huge part of 4th edition character builds. And so to tell people you can't do that was theoretically a really big negative, but players actually came around to finding it as being really positive, right? So there's all that back and forth that's hard to fully envision up front when you're designing this.
Yeah. If you are creating content for the campaign, what resources do you have? And how do you use those resources? If you can only make 20 adventures for the entire year because of your budget, is it all low level? Do you make sure that new players will always have something to play? Or do you space it out so that the players who play consistently will have something for their higher level characters to play? And I could go on and on about that.
Well, and I'll give you something, Shawn, which is, if I were advising any company, not just Wizards on an organized play program, and I've had the fortune to do this for various companies over the years, the first thing is like, what is the point of this campaign, right? Are you marketing people on what's available? Are you encouraging people to buy books? Are you spreading the word of your game in gaming stores or at conventions? Like, what is the whole point of this? And knowing those goals, listing them, and making sure that your program serves those is important, right? When we did Ashes of Athos, one of the things that we knew and we made clear was we are an auxiliary campaign, right? We are the not main Living Forgotten rules, but the other thing you can play. And so in some ways, it's cool to be quirky and different. It doesn't have to please everybody at all. That's kind of the point of it. It's for the people that maybe aren't enjoying the main thing, right? And so that creates a different way that you operate. But knowing why you're doing it, how you're going to promote it and talk about it, and that you're going to want to do that continually as a company, that's hard, right? And we've seen that come and go with programs, right? Like how stores have worked with encounters or post encounters as encounters sort of faded away, and it was like you get a PDF, and is there still a program here, right? Those kinds of questions are really important when you're thinking about the design of a program.
For sure. How do you track character advancement? Do you take steps to stop people from cheating? Do you have heavy paperwork with game masters having to have specific numbers and sign their names to your character sheet or to your tracking sheet? Or do you go very light on the paperwork so as not to burden people with a heavy accounting kind of system? But that also then makes it easy for people to say, oh, yeah, my character's 13th level and it has all these magic items. See, here's my character sheet. What do you mean? I did this and you have no way of proving I didn't. So here we go. There's that.
Well, if one table murders the Orc Lord and the other one befriends it, does anything happen? Did you care in either instance, or is there an average result? Are you tracking results, right? Like those are questions too.
The effect on canon is huge. How much, speaking of that, and speaking of Teos' earlier answer, how much leeway do you give DMs in running adventures? There is something to be said for, as Teos said, all the DMs running as close as they can to the adventure. Don't change anything unless you absolutely have to. You're going to get that community experience, and people could say, did you defeat the hill giant there? Oh, yes, we defeated him and got his magical sword. Oh, no, we didn't defeat him, but we ran away, so we didn't get the magical sword, but we rescued the orc chieftain, so we did that.
Right.
Versus giving game masters the opportunity to go off and change things to make the table that they're running more fun, but losing that sense of community where you could say, yeah, my 2 or 3 5th level characters defeated the whole adventure. And you're like, how? There was a hill giant chief. Well, we just did. I don't know. No way. There's no way that 3 5th level characters, right? It's that sort of thing that you have.
Hill giant chief. My DM turned it into a pixie. It was a role-playing encounter, and so who knows, right?
Yeah.
And
we got 3 magical swords.
Yeah. It's funny, and one of the things that I really like in organized play is combine experts with new people to administer the campaign, right? And I had the pleasure of working early on Ashes of Athos with Chris Sims, and he would ask these questions because it was all new to him, right? And he'd come up with some really neat ideas, many of which we implemented, but sometimes he'd say things like, wait, we have to care about how much treasure the characters get? And it's like, oh, yes, let's tell you a few stories. And people will do that? Like, what's wrong with them? Oh, yeah, people will do these things, right? And so if you care.
One of the people most famous for doing those things is now a staff designer at Wizards of the Coast. Wonderful person. Played havoc with the Living Greyhawk rules in absolutely magnificent and horrifying ways. So, yes, people will do that, not out of... spite or malice, or just that's the rule. So I'm going to do what I can.
Yeah.
So
totally.
In terms of what Wizards should do, I have no idea. I have overseen campaigns from Living Greyhawk to Zendrick Expeditions to Living Forgotten Realms, Oracle of War, some third-party stuff, even outside of D&D. So there is no perfect system. But as Teos said earlier, what you have to say are, what are our goals? And based on those goals, then you can go through this, just this partial checklist, just this 1 or 2 out of 200 checklist to say, all right, to do this, we do that.
Yep, totally. 100%.
So thank you for those questions, and we will get to more next week, but we have just a wee bit of news to get into since Gen Con has come and gone. We have a new 2024 Player's Handbook to talk about.
Yes, we do. And Gen Con was the place where it debuted to huge numbers. 71,000 people sold out Gen Con, a record. God, I remember when it was 20,000, and that felt unbelievably huge.
Oh yeah.
Baldwin Games reported that they sold their 250th ticket, 250,000th ticket. Sorry,
A quarter of a million.
quarter of a million. And they actually filmed a hilarious video of Dave Christ of Baldwin Games going over and awarding prizes to the ticket holder, who turned out to be a young girl at this one table at Gen Con. It's a very cute video. And she got, I think, bag number 2. Mm-hmm. Unless you stole her bag. I don't know how it worked.
I didn't.
Okay, good.
As far as everyone knows.
If you missed it, next year's Gen Con is July 31st to August 3rd. And if conventions are hard to visit, the next Baldwin Games D&D virtual weekend is August 16th to 18th. And we've got a link in our show notes for how to get those virtual games, but you can also Google that up. 3,000 people got this new player's handbook, and the D&D staff were there in large numbers with lots of information, media events, seminars. What did you think? What did you see when you were there?
I saw the Baldwin Games room, then I saw the dealer hall, then I saw a bunch of meeting rooms and panel rooms. I didn't get a chance to go to any of those big events, but they were well reported on, and so we are going to give you those highlights as covered by other folks. And I will let you take over there.
Sure.
Teos.
Yeah. You're recovering. So Greg Tito welcomed everybody at a media event, and then Jess, the new vice president, talked about the benefits of Dungeons and Dragons and communities. Really nice. The quotes that were from this section are really very nice in terms of all the things that she mentioned. The success of the D&D movie and Baldur's Gate 3 showcasing the way that D&D tells universal stories. A lot of our information comes from Christian Hoffer and Mike Ballas, who both had really great threads on the old Twitter site. Quotes like, "They are not gatekeepers of imagination, but they want to be gardeners who support others to tell their stories." Or, "D&D has become the fastest growing gaming brand, but that also is a great challenge about who they are and who they want to be. Is the brand evolving with the need of the branching players? Every game needs to cherish and honor the legacy, but continue to grow new branches to reinvigorate the growing fandom, providing the possibility of endless stories for years to come." And there were some interesting tidbits that you made all of us go, wait, what? Tell me more. I want to know where that's going. Such as, there will be more product lines that cater to different gameplay styles in the coming years. There are an estimated 64 million D&D fans, including both TTRPG players, video game players, and general fans of the franchise. During the pandemic, there was a 300% increase in new users for D&D Beyond. And Jess did a lot of talking that maybe as a new person felt that, she could really do, which I applaud. Acknowledging the OGL debacle, the importance of the OGL to many staff members, and helping them come up the ranks over the years and end up at Wizards of the Coast. The irrevocable Creative Commons license. Jess also shared that there will be more third-party content. Yeah, go ahead, Shawn.
Well, yeah, that I was going to say, this is something people have been listening for, is the third-party content on D&D Beyond, and they want to add more curated work first, and we're seeing more and more and more content going up there. I think Cobalt Press's Even Tides was the latest thing that went up. But then she released the tidbit that maybe in 2 years or so, it will be open to all creators, as the DMs Guild currently is. And then Sigil, which is the virtual tabletop, may also become a marketplace where anyone can put up their work. So people that were worried about nobody being able to take part in this, opening it up to everything. And the other important thing to note was, as new options open up for established brands, there can be a reactionary push to, because you are now going digital, it's going to ruin books. Because you are making these things mean you must not be making these things. And I think what we heard from Jess was, the game's not going away. And she said, is D&D moving digital? She was asked, and she said, well, I just drove here from a printing press, so I hope not. Right? They are fully committed to physical artifacts,
Yeah.
books, minis, all the things that you might love for your game. Just because you might be able to do things digitally, just because you might be able to buy things on a virtual tabletop, does not mean anything else is going away.
Right.
So it's fine to keep an eye on things. You and I are going to be doing that, right?
Yeah.
Does digital change the game?
Right.
That is an
Right.
important question.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just because there is digital doesn't necessarily mean that there will be some sort of cataclysm from what we have seen
Right.
in the past.
Right. And there can always, as we talked about before, there can always be somebody who says, hey, I think we should just stop this paper stuff. Let's embrace the future.
Mhm.
But there are more than one person at a company. And so generally those courses write themselves and correct themselves because of that understanding.
Mhm.
We got to see covers, which we've seen in the past. Chris Perkins, Jeremy Crawford came out and shared all 3 books are 384 pages. The Player's Handbook coming out September 17th. The DMG is now November 12th, and the Monster Manual February 18th. And we had a quote of aiming for the DMG to be this indispensable, very valuable companion for dungeon masters of any level of experience while learning, prepping, and running the game. This DMG contains a complete set in Greyhawk as a tool to learn how a setting works, how to customize it, but also as a testament of the original setting and its longevity through the history of the game. It also has 5 sample adventures designed and formatted so new DMs can, with minimum prep, dress their game, including full maps that are meant to be reusable for ongoing use. And there was an interesting Screen Rant interview with Chris Perkins that we've got further down in our show notes. And in it, he talked about this goal of, and even a contrast between 2014 and now, where they had such a low budget that they couldn't do a lot of things they wanted to. So the reason you see those maps that are included in the 2014 DMG that come from things like Vault of the Dracolich are because they couldn't afford to have new maps created, right? The budget wasn't there for that. And so they just kind of picked some that they had the rights to, that they own and just from previous projects and put them in there. So now they're doing new work and trying to flesh this out, spending where it's necessary and useful.
Yep. There will be tracker sheets in the DMG meant to help DMs keep track of everything from NPCs to player preferences to plot points. And it will all be free via download. The tracking sheet will contain a picture of a baby Myconid, a baby Hellhound, and a Flumph. And then people went, ah. But, some people have bad taste, right, Teos?
I don't know what you're talking about, but the DMG was redesigned with UX constraints. Or I think this is the Dungeon Master's screen was redesigned with this idea of sort of like, what is the UX of this, right? What is that user interface, and how do you make that work better? The Monster Manual has 500 revamped monsters, reworked CR. We'll see what that means. Better treasure suggestion structure. Almost every monster has something new. And we did see various glimpses of monsters. A Kuatoa was shown. The green, I think it's the ancient green dragon was shown off. And we, on our Discord, we had fun breaking down the math of it. It's substantially stronger. In fact, it's very close to the Forge of Foes numbers that we put together, as one of our Discord members remarked. Really hitting kind of a higher threshold of damage, and things like legendary actions are gone now. They're reactions. Is that good, bad? You decide. But those kinds of changes are coming there. What else, Shawn?
Jeremy Crawford said that the Artificer is in the works, but can't say when or in what product we will see it. And then the virtual tabletop got shown with Chris Ko and Cale Stutzman, showing the latest version, confirming that the internal name was Sigil. It will include worlds and familiar characters. They showed off minis based on Baldur's Gate 3, and then the virtual tabletop tools to how to build in real time. The virtual tabletop will integrate with D&D Beyond, allowing items, minis, and elements to pass between the two, or at least pass over to Sigil from D&D Beyond. Later, they said the character sheet is integrated with D&D Beyond, but they're open to bringing more if that's what the users want.
Yeah, there's a little confusion there in various sources that I read as to whether, in D&D Beyond, what exactly is passing over to Sigil, or is it coming from somewhere else, or, like a monster. Is a monster actually coming from D&D Beyond over there? Could you make a homebrew a lot of that stuff still question marks there. But as we say somewhere here in our notes, there will be a playtest coming out. So we will get to playtest that this year if you are a D&D Beyond member and you sign up for it. And so that's the kind of feedback that I think will be important to pass on.
There you go. What else? The virtual tabletop has an adventure called Danger in Dunbarrow, which will include adventure notes for the DM. And Sigil will be on an app, not in a browser, so not browser based. They'll start with PC, but then be able to move to mobile after that, then potentially onto consoles. What did you want to say about the screen rant, if anything else?
Well, so they talked about a new innovative starter set. We've got a really exciting product coming up on the heels of the core rulebooks that's going to reinvent how starter games are thought about and delivered. This is all a quote from Chris Perkins. I'm very excited because I think it's going to be the most welcoming, exciting way to get new people to understand the fundamental concepts of D&D if they're not already playing. Whoa.
And apparently there was, no comment. There was a live play game on Saturday, which featured both Theater of the Mind, and then halfway through, they switched to using the virtual tabletop. We haven't watched it, but from what some people said, the switch actually resulted in less fun.
Yeah.
Because it was, it was the, hey, this is why we're playing D&D. We talk, we joke, and it's like, ooh, tabletop. And then everybody was looking at the tabletop rather than interacting with each other and the DM.
Yeah, I think the video just came out today, so it's not been where we can see it. But yeah, that's what I heard. The first part was sort of flirting and very open play as they played some Baldur's Gate characters and things like that. And then it was, okay, tabletop. Now we're moving things on the virtual tabletop and seem to have that kind of focus. But, that doesn't necessarily speak poorly of Sigil, right? It can be just that, well, if you give those kinds of cues and signals, that can change how we approach the game. So it'll be interesting to watch that video and see what I really conclude when I look at it.
For sure. So I got home from Gen Con just in time to hear about something that what has Wizards done now? Oh my goodness, the sky is falling, etc., etc. And Teos, you were kind of on the periphery of this, if not directly in the middle of it. So I'm going to let you tell the story.
Well, I'm still checking my email right now to see if I have an update, because yes, it was a bit surprising for those of us who had received early copies. We had been months ago, a number of us who are creators of something, mostly folks who do streaming and YouTube and things like that, were given the possibility, we're invited to have an early copy as a PDF and later receiving the book. But that required signing an NDA. And so for months, I've had the player's handbook and I could read it and really get acquainted with how much I hate reading digital things versus the physical. And over time, it was clear that things were in flux, right? So twice the timeline for when the embargo would be lifted and we could talk about it was moved. And the most recent time was fairly recent that we got like on August 1st, you can share things. And that makes sense because August 1st is when people would have it at Gen Con, right? And it would have been really weird if folks at Gen Con were going online and talking about the books they just got, and the people who you asked to talk about it couldn't do so yet. So I think that timeline got accelerated twice. And on August 1st, a bunch of us put out videos. Some folks, at least two, put videos that apparently were so thorough that they were like high-res, page-by-page flip-throughs, one of them using the actual digital version rather than the paper copy to showcase even with the watermark. And so apparently there are PDFs out there that people constructed from these videos. And I'm sure Wizards heard about this and just lost their minds while at Gen Con, right? So you can imagine how that split brain just doesn't work very well if you're in one place trying to do one thing. And then, here comes this news of some disaster going on online. What I saw was that on Saturday, first I get a couple of emails saying, hey, we've updated our guidelines for how to share. And then I got an email specific to me saying, hey, please go into your video and wherever you show a full page, you should blur 50% of it. And wherever you have a 2-page spread, blur 75% of it. And when you do the math, it's basically everything. Because of the way it works with a rectangle, like it just, you're really not showing anything. And had we known beforehand, creators could have done something like, well, show a part, right? Zoom in and show a thing. That's easy. But to go and then add a blur afterwards. So we had things like Mike Shea just added this giant blur block to his entire video that's supposed to be a walkthrough. And it's like almost comical. I tried to do it, but my video kind of zoomed in and out. And so I found I spent an hour and I was nowhere near applying this. So I I can just blur the whole thing. So I just said, you know what? I wrote back. So first I was really frustrated. I was angry. And I spoke with just a couple of friends. I didn't even go to the Patreon Discord. I just to a very couple of friends and sort of vented a bit and we talked. And then I kind of tried to imagine what it must be like to be Wizards, focus on Gen Con, and you hear that somebody is, making PDFs out of a page by page flip through. And I got it a bit. And so I wrote a calm email back to the creator relations people at D&D who have been awesome. And those people are incredible, really kind and careful, nice with you all the time. And I said, listen, here's my feedback for this. You shouldn't really change your goal. What's permissible after, you've already given out guidelines and given out books and stuff. And just, if the problem is that some people will be bad actors, well, then maybe don't give those people books, right? Or stipulate exactly what you want well ahead of time so that people can decide whether they want to sign up for this or not. Maybe what you should do is choose a few people and say, hey, Teos, you cover this section, right? But ultimately, it comes down to it's either a copyright violation or it's not. Because you now have 3,000 copies at Gen Con that anybody can stream. And in theory, what you want is you want your people who you trust to talk about it so that those people carry the day and their videos are the most popular. And you can't stop piracy. You can't do anything like that. And so what I said to the folks at Creator Relations is, look, that makes no sense for me to spend hours. I've got work to do. Trying to pay for college. If you want me to take down my video, I will. And they said, well, we'll go back and have a conversation. And I have yet to receive the email back with anything else. And it sounds like, they took down someone's video and issued a YouTube strike, which is a big deal. They've rescinded that strike. So it sounds like they're softening their stance and rethinking things. But I think it shows, Shawn, we're not in Kansas anymore. We're not back where we were, for third edition, where the only people covering something were like a Game Rant or some kind of, place that's at least closer to journalism. Now it's random people, right, who have a YouTube channel that's kind of big. And that person isn't schooled in journalism or copyright law or anything. And they may think it's totally awesome to have a page by page video so that people can, in fact, view that video instead of ever buying the book.
I have so many opinions, on this. I can't even. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. So I think it's a thing we're in a new era, Shawn, and I think this is something that now anybody has to think about, right? If you're Kobold Press, if you're whoever, like you need to think about Critical Role, right? Like, someone might do this, and so I have to have a plan.
Yes, but no. This is a very specific problem for Wizards. It's comparing Wizards to Kobold Press or MCDM or Ghostfire Gaming or anyone else is sort of disingenuous because it's a whole different thing. You and I have said this before. Wizards of the Coast isn't competing with Paizo. Right. They're competing with Disney. And lawyers are going to lawyer. Right. Lawyers don't care about public relations. Lawyers don't even really care about sales. lawyers work in this other world over here that is their domain. So they need to focus on that domain.
Yeah.
And if they are listened to, and sometimes they should be, right? It's like what Kennedy said about politicians, right? Every parent wants their kid to grow up to be president. No parent wants their kid to grow up to be a politician. And so, right, some people are like lawyers, ew, until they need one. And then it's like, oh, thank goodness this person figured this out and saved me. And so that's what you're dealing with at this level. You're dealing with problems that go beyond customer relations, go beyond influencers, go beyond that sort of thing. I'm not saying it was right in this case, but I'm saying that's the level that Wizards is working on. I don't think Paizo has a team of attorneys who are worried about IP issues that they might have to go to court to uphold, because D&D is $1 billion overall industry, whereas that is not.
No, that's true. I mean, I think there's still a worry that any creator could have about whether someone would do something like this with their videos, but the stakes are not anywhere near there, right? If someone decides to share my $4 or $5 supplement, that's not the end of the time. But if Disney concludes that they can legally reproduce D&D because of XY that happened in the year blah, that's a big problem.
For sure.
$1 billion problem and bigger. So yeah, there are different stakes. And it's difficult because Wizards has to react often quickly to things, but reacting quickly is often going to be seen in very negative light. And this was seen in very negative light yet again. Not shocking. I think they did overreact, but I can understand it. I can empathize somewhat. It's tough. It's tough, right? But ultimately, this is something worth working through, and hopefully there are lessons learned from all of this. So, we got a lot to cover. So,
it comes down to communication, right? This should have all been done a year ahead of time.
Yes.
The creator should have been vetted. The influencer should have been vetted. It should have been clear to them. All of that.
If you give a copy of your book to someone who's been trashing you continuously, you shouldn't be shocked that something bad happens. And also, someone new might decide that this is a great way to drive hits, because there's a lot of things that lead that way, algorithmically in whatever way. So yeah, you need a plan now more than ever, and especially if your name's D&D. In some other Gen Con news, Shawn, United Paizo Union wins the Diana Jones Award. The ENnies came out. The big news here, you can see at ennie-awards.com the full list of winners. But the big one was Shadow Dark winning Best Game, Best Layout and Design, Best Rules, and Product of the Year. Just incredibly. It was a good day to be Kelsey. Congrats, Kelsey.
Congratulations. Excellent work.
I don't know when in the history of the ENnies there's been a more cheered on win than these. So it was really very good and well deserved. So fantastic.
It was awesome. In comic news, of all things, there will be new D&D and Magic the Gathering comics coming from Dark Horse Comics. So D&D had a deal with IDW for the past 14 years, but apparently that is over, and Dark Horse has now taken over that mantle. They have recently put out a Stranger Things D&D miniseries comic. And they held the license back in the 80s or 90s before this deal with IDW. So you can look for new comics and graphic novels starting in 2025. And there is a link in our show notes to that place. What else? We have Lego D&D minifigs available for pre-order. Tell us about that, Teos.
12 figures, including Tasha the Archmage, Zastam the Than Lich, the Lady of Pain, Strahd, Mind Flayer with a tiny, cute Intellect Devour pet. So much. So these are packaged one to a blind box, $5 each box. But we heard you can use the Brick Search app to scan the QR code on a package, and it'll tell you which figure is inside. So you can also buy a sealed 6-pack for $30, which apparently really improves the chances of this being an actual assortment of figures versus getting the same one over and over again. And then you can do that whole scanning thing to make sure you get the ones you need. So pretty cool. They look amazing. And I think we're on to our creator corner, starting with City of Arches by our friend Sly Flourish. The Mike Shea has been working on this for some time. He's been sharing it on his Patreon. I've enjoyed looking at this, refining it with Patreon feedback. It's now a 160-page high fantasy city sourcebook, a setting made to help you have exciting adventures with a 1-hour intro scenario, player's guide, reactions in the city and deep below it, adventure hooks, and more. He's got a whole cool description about how people are going on in these eclectic markets of the city, while below, beyond the city's mysterious archways, lie sites of endless adventure and the shadowy grasp of an ancient evil seeking to return. There's a free 42-page sample, and you can check it out on Kickstarter.
And we would be remiss if we didn't mention this. There's this guy named Brandon Sanderson. I think I pronounced that right. He's written some books, and they just today, just like our friend Mike Shea, launched a Kickstarter. Mike's is doing great. Mike's is fantastic. This one is already up to $3 million in just a couple of hours, and it's just starting. So if you're a fan of Mistborn and Stormlight, this is the one for you. It uses a D20 based system and is hoping to deliver in 2025 for Stormlight and then 2026 for Mistborn. If you back at the Game Master level, it's $300. But excuse me, it does include 6 hardback books.
It made you cough. I mean,
and more. Yes, it does. The lead designer is Andrew Fisher, and there are a number of well-known contributors. I've been seeing some people I know popping up to say, I worked on this book.
Yeah, pretty cool.